So today we're going to continue studying the thinkers of the Enlightenment as we study how people's mind shifts and the way they think about the world continues to change. So we focused last time on Monday, we focused on how the scientific revolution and new ways of thinking started to break into the way people thought about government and people thought about society. So we're going to continue that today. We're going to see how a few new thinkers continue to add new ideas that have been adopted into modern governments in our current world. So when we last talked on Monday, we talked specifically about how Hobbes and Locke viewed the world. And we saw that Hobbes believed people were bad and therefore needed powerful governments. And Locke thought people were generally good and had natural rights, and therefore we just needed some government to protect us. They don't have to be powerful, but a limited government that can protect our rights. So today we're going to look at these other four thinkers, Montesquieu, Rousseau, Voltaire, and Thomas Jefferson. So we're going to begin with Voltaire. And Voltaire believed primarily in the freedom of thought, speech, and religion. So most people, when they think of Voltaire, they think of this era, and they specifically attribute the beliefs of freedom of speech to Voltaire. So someone who's had a major impact on our current society and our current government. So during his life, he's going to demand that kings offer people more freedoms, and like I said, particularly freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. He's going to fight against prejudice, and he's going to push for his French king to be more tolerant towards people's viewpoints. From his perspective, he did not believe that people should be censored. He thought people should be allowed to speak and think whatever they wanted and worship whatever God they wanted. And whether or not the government disagreed, it didn't matter. The government should still allow it. So that's going to have a major impact on our current government because we know that we all have the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion. And that can be attributed directly to this man known as Voltaire. So one of his more impactful quotes and memorable quotes, Voltaire said that I may disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. So what is this statement saying about Voltaire? Well, one of the things it tells us is that he truly believed deeply that the freedom of speech is important. Because he's saying even if he disagrees with what you're saying, even if he disagrees with who you vote for, even if he disagrees on what you believe to be right, he is still going to defend that you should have the right to speak that way. And that's at the very heart of what freedom of speech means, that regardless of your particular viewpoint, you should be allowed to express yourself and not get in trouble for it politically. Now, you may say things that make you unpopular and people don't like, but what Voltaire is talking about is just because you say something people don't like doesn't mean you should be thrown in jail, right? Because at this time, there was no freedom of speech. You spoke out against your king, and chances were you disappeared or you went to jail. And so Voltaire is going to advocate that there should be a political freedom of speech so that people can discuss and work towards making a better society without fear of being sent to jail. So then we come to Montesquieu. And Montesquieu's idea was very simple. He figured that giving the power to one person was a bad idea. When you give one person all the power, that's great if they're awesome. But if they're a terrible leader or a terrible person, giving them all the power gives them a lot of destructive power. And a good example of this would be Hitler. Hitler ends up taking all the power in Germany, and because he wanted to use that power for bad things, a lot of people suffered. So instead, what Montesquieu advocated for was a separation of powers and something known as checks and balances. Basically, he thought that the power of government should be split up into three different groups. Instead of having one person that was in charge of everything, he said you needed one part of the government to be in charge of making the laws. That's the legislative branch. The legislative branch makes laws. He said one group should be enforcing the laws, known as the executive branch, and one group should be interpreting the laws. That's the judicial branch. So this is an idea that our government actually adopted. We have these three branches of government within the United States of America. The legislative branch of our government makes the laws. That is our Congress and our Senate. The executive branch enforces the laws. That is the president and the people the president is responsible for. And then the judicial branch interpreting the laws, that is our court system. They're the ones that determine whether or not someone has broken the law, and then therefore what their punishment must be. Now, the reason this is so important to Montesquieu and so important to us in the modern world is because having three different branches of government protects against someone from having absolute power and acting in a tyrannical manner, acting like a tyrant. If you give one person all the power, it can go great or it can go terrible. And so Montesquieu's trying to figure out, using this scientific method we've been talking about, he's trying to figure out how can we form a better system of government. And so he decides if you have the power in different hands, things balance out a little bit. You have three branches of government. So in this way, if the president under the executive branch goes crazy and is doing all kinds of things that are unlawful, well, the legislative and the judicial branch can stop them from doing anything that is against the law. If the legislative branch goes crazy and starts making all kinds of laws that are wrong, the executive and the judicial branch can stop that. And so what they do is they balance each other out to make sure that we don't have any one group acting in a way that is not benefiting the people. So let's talk about Rousseau real quick. So Rousseau believed that government should represent and benefit the majority of the people. And that might sound like a great idea, and there are some merits to it, but we're going to see some of the problems that occurred with this. So Rousseau, like John Locke, is going to believe that people are naturally good, but he takes it a step further and says the reason people are bad is because society corrupts them and makes them bad. So he says when we're a baby, we are born good, but we learn to do bad because of the culture and society around us. So what he thinks the best form of government is, based on those ideas, is that the best form of government is a direct democracy where every single person gets a vote and the common good of the majority is followed. Now, what he ends up calling the common good is the general will of the people, or the general will of the majority. And what he says is we all enter into a social contract, so we give up some of our rights, and in return, the government represents us. So he says we give up some of our rights so that we have this right to vote and work with people. And then we agree when we give up those rights, we will follow the general will of the majority. But the problem with this type of system is that the general will can sometimes do bad things. What happens if 75% of the people agree that they want to kill the other 25%? Or what happens if 75% of the people decide they want to enslave 25% or steal, or take advantage of them in some way? So this does not protect the minority or the smaller groups, the groups of people who don't agree with the majority. It doesn't protect them from having their rights taken away. Now, the leaders during this time are hearing all the things that these philosophers are saying, Locke, Hobbes, Rousseau, Montesquieu, Voltaire, and some of them are impacted by it. So some of the absolute monarchs of the day, they're influenced by the Enlightenment, and they become known as what are called enlightened despots. A despot is just one of the absolute rulers of the day. So now we have an absolute ruler who is enlightened. And that kind of seems like it doesn't go together, but it does. The way this works is these absolute rulers, or these despots, they give the people some additional rights based on these Enlightenment ideas, but they still kept the power to themselves. So they still believe that God has given them power. They still believe that they have all the power in the country and no one else shares it with them. But they do admit that people should have some rights. So the old way of thinking would basically say that the people exist to serve the king. But in this enlightened despot type of thinking, the king believes he exists to serve the people. He has been given all of this power to serve the people. And so that's the shift there. So they're going to start to favor giving people a little bit more rights, like religious tolerance, some types of religious and economic freedom, some type of freedom of speech, but they still keep the power to themselves. So an enlightened despot is someone who gives the people some rights, but they keep all the power to themselves. So one of the big things we're going to see is that they set the stage for revolutionary movements in the future, and we're going to come to this later. So I'm going to skip through this now because this is what we're really going to be studying next week, and we'll come back to this. So let's get to our next steps real quick. So our next steps, here's what you've got to do the rest of the class and the rest of this afternoon. There's an activity in the assignment folder called Absolutism DBQ. You need to go access that, and you need to start working on that now. By the time that the afternoon study session is over, I want everybody to be done with it. This activity is a little bit more difficult, and so I want to make sure that you all have enough time to work on it. It will be due Friday night. So you technically have today and tomorrow to work on it. But make sure you're getting there and you're pretty much done with it by the time the study session this afternoon is over, because you won't have the opportunity to speak with me after that. I want to be able to help you guys if you need the help, so make sure you're doing this early so you have access to that.